My name is Yi Qing, and I'm a level 0 abyss collector. Because of this, I can't inflict any damage on monsters, so my survival relies solely on collecting the leftovers discarded by adventurers. As a level 0, I'm considered a burden by the members of the Force clan, a useless piece of trash. Sure, you could say I live like trash, but I certainly won't die like it. Alright, I know the story started out of nowhere, so let's take it easy and rewind a bit. Let's go back to a place called City G, specifically in front of an entrance to a level C abyss. And that guy over there running away from a monster that looks like a kraken, yeah, that's our protagonist. As I mentioned before, his name is Yi Qing, an experienced abyss collector. His daily job is to collect and classify the trash left behind by adventurers who slay monsters. He does this because the abyss administrators don't allow these resources to fall into the hands of ordinary people. And the reason for this is pretty clear. After all, a level C crystal is worth more than 50,000 each. But as we already know, someone labeled as trash is never treated well. Suddenly, a guy approaches the protagonist, warning him to take good care of the items and not even think about stealing anything, as he knows what would happen if he did. However, the protagonist calmly responds that he's fine and wouldn't do such a thing. To explain the protagonist's work in more detail, he collects trash, right? So, in this case, the adventurers kill the monsters, and if they fail to do so, the low-level collectors, who are level 0 players, have to risk their lives. So, it's no exaggeration to say this job could cost someone their life. Oh, and about the salary, the base is 300 yuan, and the collector can earn 1,000th of the value of the trash collected, which would be around 600 yuan. But after deducting the agency's 30% fee, he takes home about 540 yuan. By that point, the protagonist had saved about 670,000 yuan, but that still wasn't enough. Just then, a guy who seemed to be a miner asked the protagonist if he was looking for work. If so, he had a job that paid 3,000 yuan. Hearing this, the protagonist immediately accepted. The man then informed him that if he was serious, he should follow the group that was there. The scene then cuts to a bus. Inside, there were several people heading to a shopping mall in the city of Xianfeng, which, according to what they knew, had recently transformed into an abyss classified as level A. This explained the high commission because, from what they'd seen, every group that had gone there had been decimated. But this time, the task was relatively simple. They just needed to retrieve the equipment from the previous group that had been wiped out. Even though it sounded simple, it wasn't easy. Someone asked why the abysses were now managed commercially. I've been talking a lot about these abysses, so let me explain a bit more about them. 10 years ago, abyss portals appeared out of nowhere. With that, the creatures of the abyss were revealed to humanity. Only those who awakened a class had special abilities to harm these beasts. And upon their deaths, people discovered that, besides magical crystals as a source of energy, the beasts also dropped various weapons and magical items. It was akin to discovering a new continent for the second time, and humanity quickly focused on developing the abyss. However, as a result, many traditional companies went bankrupt, and society's money was funneled into this new market, the abyss industry. But what happened to the people who didn't awaken? Simple, they had no place in society. They couldn't find jobs because you had to be awakened to secure employment. As a result, the vast majority were treated like garbage. And that's where they came in, offering large sums of money up front. However, in return, people had to guarantee their most valuable asset, their organs. Of course, those labeled as garbage by society saw this as an escape. But most of the time, people just ended up screwed. Others just wanted to save their loved ones. Some thought it was better to die immediately than to live their whole life being treated like trash. And some still clung to hope. So they finally arrive at the work site. Staring at the portal before him, the protagonist thinks, this time, I need to work hard, make money, and come back alive. The protagonist then enters the popular shopping mall in the city of Xianfeng, which had actually become a level B abyss. He was awestruck, as he had never entered such an abyss before. At that moment, a loud sound echoed through the corridors, revealing several bloodthirsty wolves. A group of hunters then formed up. They remarked that it should be easy, as it was just a pack of level 1 spiritual wolves. With their first move, they threw a fireball, exploding the wolves and causing the rest to retreat in fear. But just because they were level 1 didn't mean they posed no danger, so the hunters needed to stay alert. The goal of today's mission was to reach the 5th floor, but according to one of them, it seemed the shopping mall had tripled in size and increased 5-fold in height due to becoming an abyss. The guy in glasses explained why. This is the effect of abysmalization, he said. It's like a copy of the real world used as a base to create the dungeon, but its internal structure has been completely distorted. In short, it's like Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste to infinity, blow it up in size, and throw in some monsters. As their mission was to find the items from the previous group, the guy in glasses sent the trash collectors to search for bodies instead of just trailing after the group like flies. Since they were level 0 players, that was all he was good for. As protagonist walked through the dungeon, he was still amazed by everything around him. But he didn't watch where he was going and tripped, falling to the ground. Out of nowhere, the guy with the bandana got extremely angry. He grabbed protagonist by the shirt, pinning him to the wall, and angrily called him trash for bumping into him. He warned protagonist to be more careful because he almost killed him, thinking he was a monster. However, the guy who seemed to be the leader of the group told him to knock it off, reminding him they needed to complete the mission soon. With that, bandana guy just tossed protagonist to the ground, saying that trash belongs on the floor. Deep down, protagonist was already used to it. No, rather, he had adapted to it because no one truly gets used to bad things. A burden to society, a useless person, garbage. These were the collective terms society used for level 0 people. But they didn't know who our protagonist really was. And if anyone should be called garbage, it was these adventurers for letting a monster slip by. How was a level 0 protagonist supposed to deal with that? All he had on his side, besides the wolf, was a wooden shield and a level 1 flagpole. And on top of that, the monster was injured and separated from the group, making it the perfect opportunity. Protagonist charged at the monster, landing a blow to its head. But with his level, he dealt 0 damage. Seeing this, his trashy colleagues mocked him, saying he was stupid for not realizing he couldn't damage monsters because he wasn't awakened. But of course, protagonist knew that. As a level 0, all his attack stats were level 1, and with such weak attributes, not even the weakest monsters could be harmed by his attacks. Protagonist knew this better than anyone, and that's precisely why he chose to take even greater risks. After all, as our dear friend Albert Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Oh, and speaking of adventurers, bandana guy, who had pushed protagonist against the wall earlier, remarked that the collectors were probably trembling with fear after seeing those monsters. The group leader also commented that the collectors were truly unlucky. As hunters, they earned a fortune just by killing a few monsters, while collectors lived off the leftovers. Since they had already taken most of the valuable items, the collectors were practically useless at this point. But at that moment, a member of the group noticed that a monster had slipped past them, and screams echoed down the corridor. Bandana guy was already on edge because, as their boss had said, the collectors were completely useless. Back on the other side, protagonist was being attacked by that wolf. Even though the wolf was injured, protagonist was still getting beaten up, but he refused to die like a piece of trash. At that moment, protagonist managed to stab the monster in the eye with his stick, landing a critical hit that only dealt 1 damage. And it just so happened that the monster needed exactly 1 more damage to die. Even though others might see this as a trivial fight, for protagonist, it was as if he had become a hero. But as we've seen in other stories, when the hero becomes the strongest, betrayal often follows. Bandana guy approached protagonist, sarcastically praising him for defeating the spiritual wolf alone. But he questioned who protagonist thought he was, acting like a hero, and asked if he was tired of living. After all, they weren't spending money just to buy his body. However, protagonist wasn't listening. He remembered there was more than one way to awaken a class. When a level 0 player's experience reaches level 1, they can awaken a class, making it easier to obtain a hidden class. But reaching this goal was tough, as they needed to find a way to gain the necessary experience to level up. This was extremely difficult for a level 0 player who couldn't deal damage to monsters. However, after years of risking his life and looking for critical attack opportunities to land at least 1 damage, little by little, day by day, hunt after hunt, his hard work was finally recognized. Even though he wasn't a hero who defeated a great monster, he had already been betrayed enough by life, and now it was his turn to take revenge on fate. Bandana guy was shocked to see that protagonist had gained enough experience to awaken a class. We'll see. Protagonist's body transformed, and his class was revealed as Garbage Collector. His level for the rest of his life would be 1. Seeing this, the bandit couldn't help but laugh. Even after awakening, a garbage collector would still be a garbage collector, and to make matters worse, he wouldn't progress past level 1. Protagonist, who had only 1 opportunity in life, had awakened as a garbage collector, a job literally tied to trash. But setting that aside, Bandana Guy declared, "Listen well, level 1 garbage collector. Now you're the only one responsible for cleaning up." After Bandana Guy started to walk away, protagonist began to think, garbage collector is very weak, and if the maximum level of a garbage collector is 1, he couldn't increase his attributes through leveling up. So what the heck was a garbage collector supposed to do? Looking at the wolf he had killed, the system notified him that it had found a low-level recyclable item. It asked if he wanted to recycle it. Naturally, he accepted, and a portal with several hands emerged behind him. Of course, this left him very surprised, but also filled with more questions, wondering wondering what the heck this ability was. And although it was strange, it looked really cool. The system began decomposing the trash, and after the decomposition was complete, protagonist received a soul impulse and 3 attribute points. This was incredibly absurd, so he opened the system window. To use the soul impulse, he needed 3 agility points. Since he had gained 3 attribute points from collecting that corpse, he invested everything in agility. After meeting the requirements to use the ability, he activated it and an aura surrounded him. He wondered if it had worked because he didn't feel any different. But suddenly, Bandana Guy told him to hurry up because he was taking too long. Feeling reinvigorated, protagonist started running, but he was moving too fast. It seemed that in addition to improving his running ability, he might also need to boost his vision attribute because once again he tripped over a root and fell to the ground. Now he realized that the ability had indeed worked, but since he had already used it, it was now on cooldown. However, this wasn't a problem. After all, there were several bodies in front of him that could be recycled. So maybe being a garbage collector wasn't so bad after all. After collecting all those wolf bodies, protagonist gained several attribute points. When he first recycled a wolf's body, he received the soul's impulse, but the subsequent times, he didn't gain any new skills. The rewards for recycling large quantities of the same type of body gradually decreased. In short, he needed to find different bodies to recycle and earn rewards until the end. But returning to his current attribute points, he had already accumulated 111 points. The question was, which attribute should he increase? Well, since he didn't know how a garbage collector was supposed to fight, he decided to distribute all his points evenly. In the end, he ended up with 20 points in all his stats. Meanwhile, back on the hunter's side, they were still fighting some wolves, and the group leader turned to Bandana, asking if protagonist had really changed his profession. The class he mentioned was probably a hidden one, as the leader had never seen it in the Great Class catalog. But the guy with the glasses ruined the fun, explaining that every year, hidden classes are added to the catalog. However, the rankings of the more valuable classes never change, so most hidden classes are just for fun. Bandana commented that protagonist would probably end up as, at best, a Class F hunter, slightly stronger than level 0 players, meaning the changes would be minimal. Hearing this, the leader said they shouldn't worry anymore and should just keep moving. But then, a massive root sprung from the ground, surprising everyone in the group as they faced a terrifying monster. It was a skull with several roots protruding from its mouth, and on its back was a figure nailed to a cross. The leader of the group remarked that this must be the leader of the previous group that had been decimated. This was strange, as they had only been in the abyss for less than 48 hours, so how had the bodies decomposed so quickly? Furthermore, they had only encountered low-level spiritual wolves along the way, but the hunters from the B+ reward guild had all died here. Wasn't that a bit odd? But no, my friends, it wasn't just those wolves inside the abyss. At that moment, a news report flashed on TV, stating that the abyss, initially classified as a level B mutation, now had a missing persons count of 217, and on the carriage floor, that number would only increase. The group of hunters found themselves surrounded by several monsters. Now it made sense why they hadn't found the missing bodies. They had all been gathered in one place, forming a mountain of corpses. Their path through low-level monsters had been nothing more than bait to lure them deeper into the abyss. And finally, they were facing the true boss of the abyss. Its name was High-Level Human Flesh Flower. Well, let's see how these self-proclaimed hunters would handle this situation. Meanwhile, on protagonist's side, everything was calm. He was peacefully recycling monster corpses, so much so that he even earned an achievement for recycling 50 bodies. Naturally, he was excited, expecting a reward. However, he only received a common level 1 dagger. Well, that's disappointing, right? Will all his rewards be level 1 just because he's level 1 too? It makes sense, right? Maybe he can't equip higher level items. Let's see. But what didn't make sense was the situation he was about to face. As he turned around, a woman, or at least a corpse of one, started running towards him with roots protruding from her mouth. Of course, this terrifying sight scared protagonist. In his fright, protagonist managed to dodge her attack, and while doing so, he realized his body was more agile. Up until now, he hadn't tested his new body with its improved attributes. Now, he could feel that he was stronger. However, he couldn't afford to be wrong. It would be useless to be strong if he ended up dead. Once again, he managed to dodge the attack. After repositioning himself, he activated the Soul Race ability, and now it was his turn to strike. As an awakened, he would no longer deal 0 damage. When he attacked the woman, or whatever that corpse was, the system notified him that the attack had 20 strength, causing a penetration effect on the target, with physical damage increased by 100%. It seemed those 20 lucky points were really paying off. Thanks to his intelligence, which was also at 20, his perceptiveness had significantly increased, allowing him to detect hidden information about the target. Now, he discovered that it was a parasitic human essence. His perceptiveness was sharp enough to even reveal its weaknesses: fire, the neck, and a connection point, though he wasn't entirely sure what that meant. Armed with this information, Protagonist closed in on the monster. Just as the attack was about to hit him, he dodged at the last second. Repositioning himself, he summoned his dagger and aimed for the neck, which was likely the connection point. With this strike, Protagonist's luck activated, causing a bleeding effect on the monster. And with that blow, he finally managed to defeat the creature. Thanks to his 20 points in Constitution, the poison, which was essentially the monster's blood, had no effect on him, canceling out its toxicity. Naturally, Protagonist was thrilled to have finally defeated a monster on his own for the first time. And, of course, he didn't hesitate to recycle the monster in front of him. Through recycling, he acquired a passive ability called Toxic Metamorphosis. This ability was incredibly appealing because it reversed the effects of poison. Whenever he was poisoned, he would gain a random attribute instead. Naturally, he accepted this ability. He also gained some attribute points, which he distributed evenly, just as he had done before. To test if the ability was working, he quickly pulled out a highly toxic potion. You know the saying, right? Who knows? Does it live? So he drank the potion. The ability seemed to be functioning properly. Due to his ability, the poison was converted into a buff called Mental Vigor, which doubled all his base attribute values for a duration of 10 minutes. But this time, Protagonist was a bit smarter, and he invested the rest of his points in intelligence so he could uncover more hidden information about his targets. Just then, more monsters appeared. Protagonist wondered if the guys ahead had let these monsters escape. But it wasn't just one or two, it was thousands. Protagonist began to remember all the words people had said to him. A burden to society, a waste, useless. That's what they used to call him. But now he could proudly say it out loud. My name is Yi Qing, and I am a garbage collector. Meanwhile, the hunters were taking a serious beating. Some managed to defend themselves, but even though these monsters were corpses, they were stronger than when they were alive. And of course, the boss monster was a nightmare. Faced with this terror, the hunters began to flee, but one by one, they fell. The leader of the group stayed behind to try something, but Bandana, thinking to himself, realized he didn't want to die there. He was only in it for the money. Suddenly, the leader's body became paralyzed, and he asked Bandana what he was doing since they were on the same team. But Bandana coldly explained that he needed the leader to stall the monster so he could escape. He even promised to light incense for him when he returned. Yeah, folks, it's in situations like these that human nature truly reveals itself. While Bandana was plotting what he'd say to the others once he got out, he unexpectedly ran head-on into our protagonist. Bandana was shocked to see that Protagonist was still alive, and Protagonist didn't hesitate to declare that Bandana was the real trash, betraying his team just to survive. Bandana noticed that Protagonist was recycling the monsters, but he had no idea about Protagonist's ability. But that didn't matter. He couldn't let Protagonist live because he feared Protagonist would reveal that he had left his team to die. Bandana slapped Protagonist across the face and sneered, "Don't you want to get stronger? Don't you want to stand out? Now's your chance. Go ahead and be monster food." He kicked Protagonist, but Protagonist was stronger, so the attack had no effect. Protagonist calmly declared, "Since you're trash, it's time to recycle you." At that moment, Bandana began to be recycled, but he was so worthless that he couldn't even be recycled. However, attempting to recycle something unrecyclable caused Protagonist's ability to evolve and change. Now, he could recycle abilities with the target's consent. This was a bit strange because Bandana was unconscious. Did that count as consent? Nevertheless, Protagonist accepted the situation and gained a wizard's experience card, which granted him the ability to control flame fields. As Protagonist was processing all of this, several monsters were closing in on him. He didn't really know how to throw fireballs. After all, up until now, he had been just a garbage collector. However, he tried anyway, triggering a massive explosion that wiped out all the monsters in front of him. But instead of celebrating, he was stunned, not because of the attack's power, but because he had obliterated the monsters. This meant he wouldn't be able to recycle their bodies. But he couldn't let his guard down. Any mistake in the abyss could cost him his life. And of course, our protagonist knew this. Suddenly, an assassin monster attacked him. Although Protagonist managed to dodge, the monster countered quickly. Protagonist was scared because he hadn't learned any close combat skills. However, this would no longer be a problem. He spotted the body of the group leader in the distance and quickly recycled it, gaining the ability to summon a golden shield. With this defensive ability, even though it wasn't an attack, he managed to defeat the monster. Standing over the defeated monster, Protagonist quietly said, "Rest in peace." Then, he recycled that body too, gaining his first close combat ability called Dagger Proficiency. With this new ability and a purple aura surrounding him, protagonist started to look like a character from a certain famous work that I won't mention. So what's protagonist going to do now? Wasn't his mission to retrieve the bodies for a reward? If he kept recycling the bodies, wouldn't that mean his mission would fail? However, at this point, completing the mission wasn't as important as finding a way to survive. But apparently, all the bodies in that dungeon had been recycled or dragged away somewhere by someone. Oh, and for those who don't know what I'm hinting at, let's cut to an interview happening at the Abyss Supervisory Committee, more specifically in the interrogation room. The agents were questioning Bandana, saying that he was the only survivor from that dungeon. Bandana claimed that the person he mentioned didn't exist. And the strangest thing was that when they found him, his level had dropped to 1, something that had never happened before. Like a madman, Bandana started shouting, "I told you, my abilities were recycled by that person. That's the proof. That person, that garbage collector, he did it all. That's what I believe." However, the agents thought he had stayed too long in the abyss and cried so much miasma that it ended up causing several hallucinations. To explain a little more about what happened to the protagonist after that, he sold all the crystals he had gathered on the black market, but he only received about 30% of the money, and since the crystal trade had always been monopolized by big companies, private sales were illegal. The black market always charged more than 70% as a handling fee, and the crystals he sold were barely enough to pay off the debt he owed to the loan sharks from previous years. To make matters worse, he couldn't keep using his recycling ability in front of others because he feared being reported to the supervisors. Not to mention, he had awakened an occult class, so it wouldn't be impossible for them to turn him into a lab rat. For this reason, he had to hide his ability for the time being. At this moment, a man at the front of the group began to declare, "This is an abyss that has just appeared, and everything is still unknown. I assume you're aware of the risks, so the rewards will be doubled. Only those who are qualified may come forward and sign up, and let me emphasize, only those above rank B are eligible." The protagonist asked if he could qualify. When someone asked him what class he was, he replied that he was a level 1 garbage collector. Of course, upon hearing this, he became the target of laughter, with people saying that even trash dared to become a hunter. But because of his courage, he was allowed in, though only with the garbage collectors. In fact, the protagonist was counting on this, as they'd lower their guard because he seemed weak, and since he would be in the back, no one would notice when he recycled the bodies. At that moment, a woman arrived, and everyone was surprised. She was someone who had awakened a god-chosen class, and she was known as Lu Xinggran, the god-chosen daughter. She declared that they could take him since he'd be useful enough. However, one of the guys wasn't very keen on it, since the protagonist was a level 1 rookie without any qualifications. But Xing Hanan said it didn't matter if he was a rookie because, to her, everyone else there was just a placeholder. Reluctantly, the guy agreed, as they were only there to protect her, being sent by her family. So they had to follow her words to the end. The protagonist felt relieved, thinking he'd be kicked out of the group before even starting, but strangely, Xing Hanan had her eye on him. As she looked at him, the protagonist had a flashback to 2 years earlier, when he dealt critical damage to a monster and protected her, which surprised her since he was just a garbage collector hunting demonic beasts. However, he wasn't actually protecting her. He had finally managed to kill the monster for the first time and gained a single experience point. Seeing the protagonist's reaction, she thought he was crazy. She had even heard rumors about people like him, but didn't expect him to be one of them. She questioned if he was really just trying to gain experience, and the protagonist gave the most obvious answer, "Of course, it's for the money." However, Xing Hanan believed he was risking his life for just 1 experience point. And at that moment, "My friends," the protagonist began to lash out, saying, "What do you know? You people with awakened classes think you're so superior. How could you possibly understand how bitter and hard life is for us trash?" She had left the group and pushed ahead, putting her life on the line, fighting so many demonic beasts. He asked, "What are you trying to prove?" Xing Hanan simply said it was obvious. She wanted to get stronger and be the first to conquer that place. The protagonist was puzzled, asking, "What place?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she asked him another question, "What's your real goal in getting a class?" And this time, he gave an honest answer, "My family. I want to get stronger to protect my family." Upon hearing this, she asked for his name, and after he introduced himself, Xing Hanan declared she was rooting for him. She said that after he got his class, he should join her group, as they would conquer that place together. The protagonist was surprised by her reaction and the way she was treating him. He agreed with her, saying it wasn't good to waste time since it was dangerous, and joked that he'd get there first. She teased him back, saying they could settle it once he changed his class, as she had just killed 30 demonic beasts on her own, while he had barely killed one. She even joked, saying that counted as 0.5. I'm not sure what she meant by that 0.5, but let's move on. At that moment, some men in suits guards, probably her guards, were extremely worried, yelling that she shouldn't go so deep into the abyss alone and that she shouldn't be hanging around a garbage collector. Then they began to pull her away. Suddenly, she threw something to the protagonist, telling him to catch it. When he did, he saw it was one of those monster crystals, and that's when she said, "That's your 0.5 reward," and that, my friends, was the beginning of the protagonist's crazy and arduous journey.